Taylor had mastered the art of invisible living, washing in gas station bathrooms, collecting recyclables for pennies, sleeping in abandoned buildings and under bridges. But winter was coming, and tonight, standing on that overpass, Taylor had reached a breaking point. A truck horn blared from the highway below. Taylor flinched, stepping back from the railing. The sound had broken her dangerous reverie. She looked at Iris, the only thing tethering her to this world, and something hardened in her eyes. "Not today," she whispered to herself. Taylor pulled the thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and turned back to the shopping cart. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a bone-deep chill that promised frost by morning. Carefully, she adjusted the plastic tarp covering her sleeping daughter. 9-year-old Iris hardly stirred, exhaustion having claimed her hours ago. "Time to move, sweetheart," Taylor said. Iris blinked awake, her large brown eyes foggy with sleep. "A real place?" she asked. "Sort of," Taylor answered, forcing brightness into her voice. "Remember that old factory I showed you last week? The abandoned Brennan textile mill stood like a forgotten monument on the city's east side, which had been shuttered since 1987, its windows broken, its chain-link fence festooned with "no trespassing" signs. But Taylor had spent weeks scouting it, circling it like a cautious animal, marking a spot where the fence had been cut and inexpertly mended with twisted wire. It took them 40 minutes to push the cart across town, avoiding the well-lit areas where police might question them, sticking to shadows and service alleys. Iris walked alongside, one hand on the cart, the other clutching her rabbit. "Almost there," Taylor promised, as the hulking silhouette of the mill came into view. At the fence, Taylor untwisted the wire she'd marked weeks before, creating an opening just wide enough to slip through. She helped Iris across first, then began transferring their meager possessions: a backpack containing clothes, a small bag of toiletries, 3 precious books, and a plastic bin with their kitchen supplies. A camping stove she'd found in a dumpster, mismatched utensils, and water bottles. "What about the cart?" Iris asked. "We have to leave it," Taylor said, "but we'll find another when we need one." Inside, the mill was cavernous. Broken windows filtering moonlight onto rusted machinery that stood like mechanical skeletons. Iris pressed closer to her mother. "It's spooky," she whispered. "It's just a building," Taylor reassured her. "The sense of lives and livelihoods long vanished. And it's dry. Come on, this way." She led Iris toward the back of the mill, where she had discovered a former supervisor's office during previous reconnaissance. Unlike the main floor, the office still had an intact door, a dusty desk, and a single dirty window. Most importantly, the roof above it hadn't leaked, leaving the floor relatively dry. "Home sweet home," Taylor announced. Iris stood in the doorway. "For how long?" "I don't know, baby. As long as we can." That night, they cleared decades of dust from one corner of the office, spreading their blankets on the floor. They ate a dinner of peanut butter on stale bread, washed down with water. Morning brought gray light through the dirty window and new determination. After a breakfast of the last granola bar shared between them, Taylor began transforming their corner of the abandoned mill into something resembling a home. "School first," she told Iris firmly. "Then we clean." For 3 hours, Taylor homeschooled her daughter as best she could, reading simple math problems worked out with a pencil stub on the margins of an old newspaper. After lessons came the transformation of their space. Taylor had salvaged rags from a dumpster behind a cleaning service. Using rainwater collected in an old bucket, they scrubbed the floor until the original concrete emerged from layers of grime. "Look, Mama," Iris exclaimed, pointing to a cleaner patch. "It's actually kind of pretty," Taylor smiled. "It is, isn't it?" They hung tarps, salvaged from a construction site, to divide the space into rooms, a sleeping area, a kitchen around the camp stove, and what Iris dubbed their living room, which consisted of 2 milk crates serving as chairs and a wooden spool as a table. On this makeshift table, Iris carefully arranged their few treasured possessions: the 3 books, her stuffed rabbit, and a framed photograph of Taylor in her orderly uniform, smiling confidently at the camera. By evening, exhausted but satisfied, they sat on their milk crates, eating beans warmed on the camp stove. Outside, the mill's broken windows framed a sky turning orange and pink with sunset. "It's not so bad here," Iris offered. "No, it's not so bad. Mama, when do we get to go home? Like, a real home?" Taylor pulled her daughter close. "Baby, home isn't a place. It's us. As long as we're together, we're home." Over the next 3 months, they established a routine. Mornings were for lessons, using books borrowed from the library. Afternoons, Taylor would leave Iris, old enough now to stay alone for short periods, while she hustled for money. She collected cans for recycling, did odd jobs paid in cash, cleaning gutters for an elderly man, helping a small restaurant prep vegetables in the back alley, holding signs on street corners for going out of business sales. Each day blended into the next. They became experts at invisibility. Part of the city's backdrop, Taylor learned which dumpsters yielded edible discards, which cops looked the other way, which church served meals on Wednesdays. She memorized the schedules of public bathrooms, the locations of outdoor spigots where water bottles could be refilled, the places where free Wi-Fi signals reached outside library walls so Iris could occasionally watch educational videos on Taylor's ancient smartphone. Winter deepened around them. They plugged drafts in the mill office with newspaper and rags. Taylor borrowed wooden pallets from behind businesses to keep their bedding off the cold floor. On the coldest nights, they burned candle stubs in a metal can for the illusion of warmth, if nothing else. Through it all, Taylor saved. Pennies became dollars, hidden in an aspirin bottle tucked into her bra. By February, she had accumulated $87. It was on a particularly bitter Tuesday that Taylor encountered old Luther, a fellow street resident who collected copper wire from abandoned buildings. They crossed paths behind the Salvation Army, both hoping to be first in line when donations were sorted. "Morning, Viv." Luther nodded, his gray beard stiff with ice crystals. "Got your girl with you?" "At the mill," Taylor replied. "Any copper today?" "Nah, picked clean. But I heard something might interest you. They're auctioning storage units over at Riverside this afternoon. People don't pay their rent, they lose their stuff. Sometimes good pickings, if you've got a few bucks." Taylor considered this. She'd seen such auctions on TV, back when she had a TV. People bidding on abandoned units, sometimes finding treasures worth thousands. "What time?" she asked, her hand instinctively touching the aspirin bottle through her layers of clothing. "You can go there by noon," Luther told her, adding, "Might be worth a look, better than freezing out here all day." At noon, Taylor collected Iris from the mill. "We're going on an adventure," she announced. "What kind of adventure?" Iris asked skeptically. "One that might help us," Taylor said. "There's an auction. Sometimes people find valuable things. Like treasure? Real treasure? Maybe not pirate gold, but something we could sell. Something to help us get through winter." They caught a city bus using 2 of their precious dollars, riding to the edge of town where Riverside Self-Storage occupied a sprawling lot. A small crowd had gathered, perhaps 20 people, mostly men with pickup trucks and vans, clearly professionals who did this regularly. Taylor and Iris stood apart. A bored-looking auctioneer worked his way methodically down a row of units. The bidding was fast, competitive. Units went for hundreds of dollars, far beyond Taylor's means. She began to think they'd wasted bus fare. "Unit 273, the auctioneer announced monotonously. 6 months delinquent, owner deceased, no heirs located. Starting bid, $50. The roll-up door was raised halfway, revealing what appeared to be water-damaged boxes, old furniture, and stacks of magazines. Nothing special. The professional buyers didn't even bother to look closely. $50, the auctioneer repeated. "Do I have 50? Something made Taylor step forward. $50, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. The auctioneer blinked, surprised to hear a bid for such an unpromising unit. $50 going once, twice. Sold to the lady in the green jacket. "Mama, what did you do?" Her daughter whispered urgently. What had she done? Spent over half their savings on what looked like garbage. Taylor's stomach clenched as she handed over the money and received a padlock key and a clipboard to sign. "You have 48 hours to clear it out," the facility manager informed her brusquely. "Anything left after that becomes property of Riverside." As the crowd moved to the next unit, Taylor and Iris stood alone before their purchase. Iris peered inside, her initial excitement fading. "It's just old stuff," she said. "Let's take a closer look," Taylor suggested. The smell hit them first, mildew and abandonment, the musty odor of paper left too long in dampness. Inside, the unit was about 10 feet by 10 feet, crammed with the detritus of someone's forgotten life. Cardboard boxes disintegrated at a touch, spilling waterlogged books, a broken dresser listed to one side, missing 2 drawers. Stacks of National Geographic magazines from the 1972nd and 82nd formed yellow towers along one wall. In the corner stood an old sewing machine, its metal parts rusted solid. "Mama," Iris looked up. "That was TWA's of food money. Why would you waste it on garbage?" I don't know, baby. I just had a feeling." Iris kicked at a moldy bag of clothes. "We could have bought real food, or a new blanket, or medicine if I get sick again." "I'm sorry," she whispered, fighting back tears. They stood in silence amid the ruined possessions of a stranger, the weight of Taylor's error hanging between them. "Maybe we can still find something to sell," Taylor suggested. "Let's at least look through it all before we give up." Reluctantly, Iris nodded. They began sorting through the unit's contents methodically. The clothes were worthless, moth-eaten, and moldy. The magazines might have had value to a collector if they hadn't been water-damaged. The dresser fell apart completely when Taylor tried to move it. "Look, Mama," Iris called, holding up a small glass paperweight with a preserved butterfly inside. "This is pretty. Someone might buy it. Good eyes, sweetheart. Put it in the keep pile." Their keep pile remained pathetically small. The paperweight, a set of relatively intact ceramic mugs, a silver-plated picture frame, tarnished but salvageable. Nothing that would recoup even a fraction of their $50. As the afternoon wore on, frustration and hunger gnawed at them both. Taylor had packed a single peanut butter sandwich, which they shared sitting on the concrete floor of the unit. "We should go soon," Taylor said, checking the time on her phone. "What about all this stuff?" Iris asked. "We'll take what we can carry. Maybe come back tomorrow for another look." As Taylor gathered their meager treasures into a plastic bag, something caught her eye. The unit's back wall had water stains in an unusual pattern, straight lines, geometric, not natural water damage, which would spread organically. Curious, she moved closer, pushing aside a stack of magazines. The wall was covered in cheap wood paneling, common in the 1972nd, but the water stains followed the seams of the panels with strange precision. Taylor pressed her hand against the paneling. It moved slightly. "Iris," she called softly, "come here." Together, they examined the wall. Taylor ran her fingers along the edge of a panel and felt a slight gap. She dug her fingernails in and pulled gently. The panel shifted, revealing that it wasn't attached to a solid wall at all. "It's a false wall," she breathed, excitement rising. They cleared the area, then Taylor pulled harder on the loose panel. It came away with a crack of aged adhesive, revealing a narrow space behind, perhaps 2 feet deep. "It's a secret place," Iris whispered, "like in books." Taylor reached into the dark space, her heart pounding. Her hand touched something solid, a metal box. She pulled it out carefully. It was a toolbox, heavy and expensive-looking, covered in dust but with 3 sturdy locks intact. "What else is in there?" Iris asked. Taylor reached again and withdrew a large manila envelope, sealed with red wax. In spidery handwriting across the front were the words, "For whoever finds this, I'm sorry I didn't have the courage." One more reach produced a small wooden box, intricately carved, about the size of a paperback book. Taylor set their discoveries on the floor, staring at them in disbelief. "Open them," Iris urged. Taylor tried the toolbox first. The locks were solid, requiring keys they didn't have. The wooden box, however, opened easily. Inside were 6 black and white photographs, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. They showed a man in his 30s or early 40s with kind eyes and a confident smile. In one, he stood proudly in front of a building Taylor recognized with a shock, The Brennan Textile Mill, their current shelter. He had his arm around a younger woman. Taylor turned the photo over and read the handwritten caption, "Opening Day, 1962. We were going to change the world, Tommy." "That's our mill," Iris said. "Yes," Taylor murmured. The wax seal broke easily, revealing several pages of handwritten letters inside. "It's getting too dark to read here," Taylor said. "Let's take these back to the mill. We can look at everything properly there." They couldn't carry much else, not with the toolbox being so heavy. Taylor wrapped it carefully in a relatively clean shirt from the unit, then packed it, along with the envelope and wooden box of photos, into her backpack. "Should we lock it again?" Iris asked. Taylor considered. "No, there's nothing left worth stealing, and maybe someone else will find something useful in what remains." They barely caught the last bus back toward downtown, using another $2 precious. All the way back, the backpack sat heavy on Taylor's lap, its contents a mystery that made her heart race with possibilities. At the mill, they slipped through the fence as dusk gathered. The building looked different to Taylor now, knowing that the smiling man in the photograph had once stood proudly before it. In their makeshift home, Taylor lit their camping lantern and set it on the wooden spool table. Iris arranged their new acquisitions carefully: the toolbox, the envelope, the wooden box of photographs. "Can I see the letter?" she asked. "After we eat," Taylor promised. They ate quickly, anticipating making the bland soup taste better somehow. When they'd finished, Taylor unfolded the pages of the letter. The handwriting was shaky but legible. The ink faded to brown in places. She began to read aloud. "My name is Adelaide Brennan. I am 74 years old, and I am a coward. This mill, the Brennan Textile Mill, was my father's. When he died in 1975, he left it to me and my brother Thomas. We ran it together until 1983, when Thomas was killed in an industrial accident. The insurance investigators ruled it an accident. It wasn't." Taylor's voice faltered. She looked up at Iris, whose eyes were wide with interest. "This is like a mystery book," the girl whispered. "Keep reading, Mama." Taylor continued. "Thomas discovered that our floor manager, Dale Pritchett, was running a scheme, doctoring safety inspections, pocketing the money meant for equipment maintenance. Thomas confronted him. 3 days later, the accident happened. Dale made sure he was nowhere near the floor that day. I knew. I had Thomas's journal. He documented everything. I had proof. But Pritchett had connections, city council, police, union bosses, and I was a childless widow who'd inherited an empire I never wanted. I was terrified. So I closed the mill, sealed Thomas's evidence in this box, and I stayed silent. For 34 years, I've lived with this shame." Taylor looked at the toolbox with new understanding. It wasn't just old tools inside, it was evidence of murder. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to the letter. The toolbox contains Thomas's journal, the doctored inspection reports, photographs of the equipment that killed him, and financial records proving the embezzlement. Also included the deed to this mill property still in my name. I never sold it, couldn't bear to, and the access codes to a safety deposit box at First National Bank box 891. I'm dying now. Cancer. Too late for courage, I suppose. But maybe whoever finds this has more strength than I did. Maybe they can do what I couldn't. Tell the truth. Taylor set the letter down, her mind racing. The mill, their current shelter, still belonged to Adelaide Brennan's estate. The toolbox contained evidence of a murder covered up for decades. "What does it mean, Mama?" Iris asked. "It means," Taylor said slowly, "that we found something important, something that could matter a great deal to the right people." They examined the photographs more carefully. Thomas Brennan's kind face looked back at them from across time, a man who had died for trying to do the right thing. In another photo, he stood with a teenage girl. The back read, "Tommy and Margaret fishing trip 1982. Her 13th birthday." "Margaret," Taylor murmured. His daughter. That night, sleep eluded Taylor. The toolbox sat in the corner of their space, its 3 locks a frustrating barrier. What evidence lay within? And more importantly, what should she do with it? She was homeless, with no credibility. The murder, if it was murder, had happened nearly 40 years ago. Dale Pritchett, the man Adelaide accused, might be dead himself by now, or still powerful and dangerous. Morning brought weak February sunlight and a decision. After their breakfast, Taylor told Iris her plan. "We're going to the library today. I need to research some things online." "About the mill? And Thomas?" "Yes, and about Dale Pritchett. And we need to see if we can find Thomas's daughter, Margaret. She'd be in her 40s now." The public library was their regular refuge on cold days. Warm, safe, with free internet access and bathrooms with soap and hot water. They arrived when it opened at 9, claiming a quiet corner with 2 computer terminals. Taylor started with Thomas Brennan's death. A brief newspaper article from October 1983 confirmed that Thomas Brennan, 43, co-owner of Brennan Textile Mill, had died in an industrial accident involving a weaving machine. Next, she searched for Dale Pritchett. To her surprise, he was very much alive, 79 years old, living in a mansion in the city's affluent Heights neighborhood. After leaving Brennan Mill, he'd become a successful business consultant, eventually having a street named after him in the new business district. The mill property search was equally revealing. It was still listed as owned by the Adelaide Brennan estate, tied up in probate limbo. According to court records, Adelaide had died 18 months ago with no will, leaving the property in legal purgatory. Finally, Taylor searched for Margaret Brennan. This proved more difficult, as she'd likely married and changed her name. But after trying various combinations, Taylor found a promising lead: Margaret Brennan Hoskins, 52, a high school history teacher at Westside High. "That's her," Taylor whispered, comparing the faculty photo to the teenage girl in the fishing picture. The eyes were the same, sad but determined. Most surprising of all was Taylor's discovery that after Thomas died, 5 other workers had died at the mill between 1983 and its closure in 1987, all ruled accidents. "This isn't just about one man," Taylor murmured, making notes on a scrap of paper. "It's about 5 families who never got answers. Are we going to tell them?" Iris asked. "Yes," Taylor decided. "We're going to tell them, starting with Margaret." Back at the mill, Taylor composed a careful letter. She had no stamps, no return address, but she could mail it from the library's public mailbox. She wrote, "Dear Miss Brennan Hoskins, you don't know me, but I recently found something that belonged to your father, Thomas Brennan. I believe you would want to see it. I've enclosed a photocopy of part of a letter written by your Aunt Adelaide before her death, and one of the photographs I found with it. If you wish to learn more, please meet me at Riverfront Park this Saturday at 2 p.m. I'll be near the fountain with my young daughter. I have something your father would have wanted the world to know." She signed it simply, "A Friend," and enclosed a photocopy of Adelaide's letter and one of the photographs, Thomas with young Margaret. At the library the next day, she mailed the letter, using the address from Westside High's website. Now all they could do was wait and hope that Margaret would respond. "What if she doesn't come?" Iris asked. "Then we try another approach," Taylor said firmly. "But I think she will. This is about her father, about justice." For the next few days, they continued their normal routine. Taylor collected cans and did odd jobs. Iris studied from library books, but the toolbox sat in their corner like a silent witness, a reminder of the task they'd taken on. Saturday arrived cold but clear. They dressed in their cleanest clothes, a relative term when one owns only 2 outfits, and took the bus to Riverfront Park. The fountain wasn't running in winter, its basin dry and littered with brown leaves, but it made an easy landmark. They arrived early, sitting on a bench with a clear view of the park entrances. Iris clutched her stuffed rabbit, nervous with anticipation. "How will we know it's her?" she whispered. "We've seen her picture," Taylor reminded her, "and she'll be looking for a woman with a little girl." At 1, a sedan pulled into the parking lot. A woman emerged, tall, straight-backed, with the same severe bun from the faculty photograph. She stood by her car for a long moment, scanning the park, clearly debating whether to proceed. "That's her," Taylor said, standing up. "Miss Brennan Hoskins?" Taylor asked when they were a few feet apart. The woman nodded stiffly. "You sent the letter." It wasn't a question. Her gaze took in Taylor's worn clothing, then moved to Iris, softening slightly at the sight of the child. "You said you had something of my father's." Taylor reached into her bag and withdrew the wooden box containing the photographs. "These were hidden in a storage unit I purchased at auction. They belonged to your Aunt Adelaide." Margaret's hands trembled as she took the box. When she opened it and saw the fishing trip photograph, her composure faltered. "Where did you get this?" She whispered, finger tracing the image of her younger self. "I lost all my pictures of him when we moved away." "There's more," Taylor said gently, producing the original letter. "Your aunt left this with the photos." Margaret read Adelaide's letter there in the park, her face growing paler with each paragraph. When she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks. "I knew," she said. "I always knew it wasn't an accident. My mother knew, but we had no proof. And Pritchett, he sent men to our house, threatened us. We moved away, changed our name. I haven't been back to this city in 40 years. We have proof now," Taylor said quietly. Margaret looked up sharply. "Where is it? The toolbox?" "Somewhere safe," Taylor answered, not ready to reveal that they were living in the very mill where Thomas had died. "I need to see it," Margaret said. "All of it." "I can't open the locks," Taylor admitted. "I know someone who might help us. A retired detective named Frank Osei. He left the force over corruption issues. He'd understand the need for discretion." They arranged to meet the following evening at a neutral location, a closed cafe owned by Frank's cousin, where they could examine the contents of the toolbox privately. As they parted, Margaret reached out impulsively and squeezed Taylor's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You could have ignored this. Most people would have." Taylor thought of the many times she'd been ignored since becoming homeless. "Sometimes," she replied, "those who society doesn't see are the ones who see the most clearly." That evening, back at the mill, Taylor tried to process everything that had happened. They had found Margaret Brennan Hoskins, Thomas's daughter, now a middle-aged history teacher who had spent her life wondering about her father's death. Tomorrow they would meet with a retired detective to open the toolbox and examine its contents. "Mama?" Iris's voice broke into her thoughts. "Are we doing something good?" "Yes," Taylor answered after a moment. "I think we are. Even though it happened a long time ago, truth doesn't have an expiration date, sweetheart. I like Miss Margaret. She has sad eyes, like yours sometimes. We've both lost things, I suppose. But now she might get answers," Iris pointed out. "That's good, right?" "Very good." The next day dragged with anticipation. Taylor didn't dare leave the mill for her usual recycling run, afraid to let the toolbox out of her sight. Instead, they prepared for the evening meeting, gathering the photos, the letter, and carefully wrapping the toolbox in an old sweatshirt for transport. "Should we bring all our things?" Iris asked. "No," she decided after consideration. "We'll come back here tonight. This is still our shelter." At 6 p.m., they caught a bus to the address Margaret had provided, a shuttered cafe in a mixed-use neighborhood. The sign on the door read, "Closed for renovations," but a light glowed from the back. Taylor knocked in the pattern Margaret had specified. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. Margaret opened the door immediately, ushering them inside. The cafe was empty of customers, chairs stacked on tables, but the kitchen lights were on, and a man sat at a back table with various tools laid out before him. "This is Frank." Margaret introduced the man, an African-American in his 60s, with watchful eyes and a salt and pepper beard. "Frank, this is Taylor and her daughter Iris." Frank Osei nodded. "Margaret tells me you've found something interesting. It was hidden behind a false wall in an abandoned storage unit," she explained. "According to Adelaide Brennan's letter, it contains evidence that her brother Thomas was murdered in 1983. Frank examined the toolbox without touching it. 3 tumbler locks, high quality. These were serious locks for the time period." He looked up at Taylor. "You understand what you might be getting into? Pritchett is still a powerful man in this city." "I understand," Taylor said, "but 5 other workers died after Thomas Brennan. 5 families never got answers." "Let me see the letter first." After reading Adelaide's confession, Frank's professional detachment wavered slightly. "I remember these cases. I was a rookie then. The department shut down any questions about the mill deaths fast." too fast. It always felt wrong. I can open this, but I want to be clear about something. If this contains what Adelaide Brennan claimed, it could be evidence in multiple homicides. It would need to be handled properly, through official channels eventually. We just want the truth, Margaret said firmly. Frank nodded and set to work with his tools. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful manipulation before the first lock clicked open. The second followed more quickly. The third was the most stubborn, requiring a different approach and several attempts before yielding with a definitive click. Inside, neatly organized, were exactly the items Adelaide had described. On top lay a leather-bound journal with T. Brennan embossed on the cover. Beneath it were folders labeled with dates, containing what appeared to be inspection reports, some original, some clearly altered. A separate folder held photographs of machinery with handwritten notes pointing out dangerous defects. Financial ledgers showed discrepancies between funds allocated for repairs and those actually spent. But most damning of all was a small tape recorder with a cassette still inside, and a typed note taped to it that read, "Pritchett's admission, the 12th of October 2083. Office conversation recorded without his knowledge." "My God," Margaret whispered. "He had everything. Dad had proof." Frank handled each item carefully, examining the inspection reports with experienced eyes. "These are clearly doctored," he confirmed. "Original safety concerns completely removed from the final versions, and these financial records show Pritchett embezzled nearly $300,000 meant for equipment maintenance over 3 years. What about that? Could we still hear what's on it? Maybe. Cassette tapes degrade over time, but there are specialists who can restore old recordings. I know someone trustworthy." As promised, the box also contained a thick envelope marked Deed Brennan Textile Mill and a smaller envelope with First National Bank box. 891 written across it. Margaret opened the deed envelope with trembling hands. "It's still in Adelaide's name," she confirmed after scanning the legal document. "The mill never left family ownership, which means it's yours now," Frank finished. The weight of this revelation silenced them all. Taylor felt a strange twist in her stomach. The mill, their current shelter, legally belonged to the woman sitting across from her, a woman who had no idea they were living there. Before she could decide whether to confess this, Frank's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" They all froze, listening. The sound of a car engine came from outside. Then headlights swept across the cafe's papered windows as a vehicle pulled to a stop. Frank moved to the window, his body tensed. Black sedan, 2 men in suits. They're just sitting there, watching the building. Margaret's face was drained of color. "Pritchett's people, I recognize the car. It's the same type that used to park outside our house after Dad died." Frank moved quickly, gathering the evidence back into the toolbox. "Someone knew we were meeting here. Was your phone with you when you made arrangements?" he asked Margaret. "Yes. My cell was with me all day at school. It could have been monitored." "We need to split up," Frank decided. "I'll take the evidence to a lawyer I trust, Eliza Chen. She specializes in corporate whistleblower cases. Works independently, not connected to any of the big firms Pritchett might influence." "What about us?" Taylor asked. "You 3 go out the back," Frank directed. "I'll leave in my car, hopefully drawing them after me. Then you scatter. No phones, no credit cards until tomorrow. Meet at Eliza's office at 10 a.m. He scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to Margaret. Frank collected the evidence, leaving through the front door deliberately visible with the toolbox under his arm. As predicted, the black sedan pulled away from the curb, following him. "Now," Margaret urged, leading them through the kitchen to a back alley. Outside, the February night had turned bitter cold, a light snow beginning to fall. Margaret led them 2 blocks east, constantly checking over her shoulder before hailing a passing cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Washington Heights," she decided, naming a neighborhood on the opposite side of town from where they actually needed to go. Taylor realized what she was doing, creating a false trail. After the cab dropped them at a busy intersection in Washington Heights, they immediately walked to a bus stop and caught a crosstown bus. "Are those men really following us?" Iris asked. "Just being careful, sweetheart," Taylor assured her. The reality of what they'd discovered, and the power of the man implicated, was sinking in. Margaret sat across from them. "Where can you go tonight? Do you have family in town? Friends who could take you in? We've been staying at the mill." "Your mill." "The textile mill. But it's abandoned, derelict." "We're homeless," Taylor said simply. "Have been for 18 months. The mill has a roof and walls. It's better than the alternatives." "Of course." "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." She thought for a moment. "It might actually be the safest place tonight. Pritchett would never expect us to go there, of all places. And apparently, I own it now." She attempted a small smile, but it faltered. "I haven't set foot in that building since I was 13, the week before Dad died. He used to take me there on Saturdays sometimes and show me how the looms worked. The bus lurched to a stop. This is our transfer. Come on." They changed buses twice more, taking a circuitous route back toward the east side of the city where the mill stood. All the while, Margaret kept a vigilant watch, and Taylor noticed how she used reflective surfaces, bus windows, storefronts, to check behind them without being obvious. "My mother taught me this," Margaret explained. "After Dad died and the threats started, how to watch without seeming to watch. How to lose someone following you." It was nearly 11 p.m. when they finally reached the chain-link fence surrounding the mill. The hole Taylor had been using was barely visible in the darkness. "This way," she murmured. "It's a tight squeeze, but it works." Once inside the mill's cavernous main floor, Margaret stopped, her silhouette rigid in the dim light filtering through broken windows. Taylor could sense her struggle, the memories of the place in its vibrant past colliding with its current desolate state. "Dad's office was up those stairs," Margaret said softly, pointing to a metal staircase. "Second door on the right. He had a jar of jelly beans on his desk for me. We're staying in what was probably a supervisor's office, in the back. Well, it's not comfortable, but it's safe." She led the way through the debris-strewn floor, Iris holding tightly to her hand, Margaret following like a sleepwalker. When they reached the office that had become their home, Taylor felt a stab of shame at its obvious poverty. The blankets piled on wooden pallets, the milk crate furniture, the camping stove, their few possessions neatly arranged to create an illusion of normalcy. "I'm sorry it's not much," she began. "Don't apologize, ever." Her voice was thick with emotion. "You've done what few would do, lived with dignity in impossible circumstances, raised a child, and still found the moral courage to pursue justice when you could have ignored it." The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to Taylor's eyes. For so long she had carried the weight of failure to provide a proper home for Iris, failure to maintain the middle-class stability they'd once had. "Thank you," she whispered. They settled in for the night, sharing the blankets and what food Taylor had, a can of beans, some crackers, a single apple divided 3 ways. Margaret insisted on taking the floor, giving Taylor and Iris the pallet bed. "Will Frank be okay?" Iris asked. "Frank knows what he's doing," Margaret assured her. "He was a detective for 30 years, and he's just taking evidence to a lawyer, not doing anything illegal." But her tone lacked conviction, and Taylor knew they were all thinking the same thing. Dale Pritchett had apparently ordered 1 murder and covered up 5 more. What would he do to prevent that truth from coming to light after all these years? At dawn, Margaret was already awake, sitting on a milk crate by the window, watching the sky lighten. "I've been thinking," she said when she noticed Taylor stirring. "About what happens next." Taylor sat up carefully. "What do you mean?" "Frank will take the evidence to Eliza Chen. She'll advise us on legal options. But even in the best-case scenario, this will be a long process. Prosecuting a 40-year-old murder case against a powerful man won't be easy or quick." "I understand," Taylor said. "Meanwhile," Margaret continued, "there's the immediate issue of you and Iris." She gestured around the office. "This isn't sustainable, especially now that you're involved in what could become a high-profile case. We've managed. You have, remarkably," Margaret acknowledged. "But you shouldn't have to just manage. And practically speaking, if Pritchett's people are watching, this place could become dangerous for you." The thought sent a chill through Taylor. She looked at Iris, still sleeping peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. "What are you suggesting?" "I own a house," Margaret said. "Nothing fancy, a small 2-bedroom on the west side. I live alone. There's a spare room that's just collecting dust." She met Taylor's eyes directly. "Stay with me, both of you, at least until we figure this all out." "Why would you do that?" she finally asked. "Because 40 years ago, someone should have helped my family, but didn't. Because my father died trying to protect people he didn't even know. Because," she paused, "because I think he would want me to." Before Taylor could respond, Iris stirred. "Is it morning?" "Yes, sweetheart," Taylor answered, smoothing her daughter's tangled hair. "And we need to get ready. We have an important meeting at 10 o'clock. They prepared as best they could, washing with water from bottles, changing into their cleanest clothes. Margaret watched with a mixture of sadness and admiration as Taylor helped Iris brush her teeth using a cup of water and their carefully rationed toothpaste. "You've thought of everything," she observed. Taylor shrugged. "You adapt. You have to." By 9 a.m., they were ready to leave. Taylor packed a small bag with their most essential items: documentation, medications, Iris's rabbit. The rest they would have to leave behind for now. "Will we come back?" Iris asked. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Not to stay. But we'll make sure to get the rest of our things later." They traveled cautiously to the address Frank had provided, a modest office building in a commercial district. The door marked Eliza Chen, attorney at law, was on the 3rd floor. Inside, Frank was already waiting, along with a sharp-eyed Asian-American woman in her 40s, Eliza Chen, presumably. The toolbox sat open on her desk, its contents spread out in organized piles. "You made it," Frank said. "Any problems?" "No," Margaret answered. Eliza Chen stood, extending her hand first to Margaret, then to Taylor. "Frank has briefed me on the situation. I've spent the morning reviewing these documents." She gestured to the materials from the toolbox. "They're compelling evidence of multiple crimes: embezzlement, reckless endangerment, fraud, obstruction of justice, and potentially manslaughter or even murder." She spoke with clinical precision. "However, I want to be absolutely clear about the challenges. The statute of limitations has expired on most of these crimes. Murder has no statute of limitations, but proving murder 40 years later, even with this evidence, will be difficult." "What are you saying?" Margaret asked. "That Pritchett gets away with it again?" "Not necessarily," Eliza replied. "There are other approaches: civil litigation against Pritchett personally, a wrongful death suit, media exposure. These options don't result in prison time, but they could achieve a measure of justice, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and possibly financial compensation to the families of those who died." "The families," Taylor murmured. "We should find them." "The other workers who died," Frank nodded. "I've already started compiling a list. With your permission, Eliza could represent all of them collectively." "What about Adelaide's tape?" Margaret asked. "Frank took this to a specialist this morning. They're trying to restore it, but after 40 years, there's significant degradation. We may not get anything usable." The conversation continued, delving into legal strategies, potential timelines, the strengths and weaknesses of their case. Throughout it all, Iris sat quietly in a corner chair, drawing on paper Eliza had provided. Finally, Eliza addressed a topic that had been hovering unspoken. "There's also the matter of the safety deposit box at First National Bank. According to Adelaide's letter, it's box 891. We have the access codes." She lifted the small envelope from the evidence. "Frank and I believe we should check it as soon as possible." "Why the urgency?" Taylor asked. "Because if Pritchett knows about the toolbox," Frank explained, "he might know about the box too. Banks have procedures, but safety deposit boxes aren't impenetrable, especially if someone has influence." They agreed to go immediately. First National Bank was only a few blocks away, its grand stone facade a testament to old money and established power. Inside, Taylor felt acutely aware of her shabby appearance amidst the polished marble and mahogany. But Eliza, with her confident manner and professional attire, handled the interaction smoothly, presenting Adelaide's letter, the access codes, and explaining that Margaret was Adelaide's heir. After verification, they were escorted to the vault area, Box 891 was larger than Taylor had expected, about the size of a small suitcase. The bank employee unlocked one lock with the master key, then left them to use the client key and access code. The four of them, Eliza, Frank, Margaret, and Taylor, gathered around as the box was opened. Iris remained in the waiting area under the watchful eye of a bank security officer. Inside the safety deposit box were two items: a thick manila envelope and a smaller, gift-wrapped package with a card addressed to Margaret. Margaret opened the card with trembling hands. Inside, in the same spidery handwriting as the original letter, it read, "My dear Margaret, if you're reading this, someone finally found the courage I never had. This money was meant to be your inheritance, your father's legacy. Thomas wanted it for your education, your future. I couldn't face giving it to you all those years ago. Blood money, I thought. Use it, however, brings you peace. And please know, I am sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect your father's memory. Adelaide." The manila envelope contained cash, a substantial amount, all in older bills. Frank counted it quickly. $47,000, he announced, his eyebrows raised. Margaret stared at the money, then at the note, her emotions visibly warring. "I don't want it," she said finally. "Not for myself. This should go to the families of the other workers. Or," she looked at Taylor, "to those who found the truth when no one else would. No, it's your inheritance, your father's legacy." "We'll discuss options later," Eliza interjected, securing the money back in the envelope. "For now, let's return to my office and formulate our next steps." Back in the sunlight outside the bank, Taylor felt a strange sense of unreality. In less than 48 hours, their lives had transformed completely, from the desperate routine of survival to the center of a decades-old murder conspiracy. And now there was money involved, further complicating the moral landscape. She glanced at Iris, who was skipping slightly ahead with Margaret, pointing out shapes in the clouds. Despite everything, her daughter seemed more carefree than she had in months. As they approached Eliza's office building, Frank suddenly stiffened, his hand going to Taylor's arm. "Don't react," he murmured, "but the black sedan is across the street, two men watching the building." Taylor's heart jumped into her throat. She casually called to Iris, who came running back to her side. Margaret saw the car too, her face paled, but she maintained her composure. "Side entrance," Eliza directed calmly, guiding them down an alley to a service door. Inside, they took freight stairs to her office, entering through a back door. "They're getting bolder," Frank observed grimly, "which means they're desperate. That's good and bad news." "How is it good?" Taylor asked. "It means they're scared of what we found," Frank explained. Eliza nodded in agreement. "We need to move quickly now. I'll draft the legal documents today, a formal complaint naming Pritchett and seeking to reopen the investigation into Thomas Brennan's death. Frank will secure the evidence in my law office safely, and I'll contact a journalist I trust at the Tribune." "What about Taylor and Iris?" Margaret asked. "They're the most vulnerable in this situation." All eyes turned to Taylor. The reality of their situation crashed down on her anew. They were homeless, with no resources, now potentially targeted by powerful enemies. "My offer stands," Margaret said firmly. "Stay with me. My house isn't much, but it's secure, in a good neighborhood, and Pritchett wouldn't know to look for you there." "Thank you," she said simply. "We accept." Margaret's house was indeed modest, a small bungalow on a quiet street of similar homes. But to Taylor and Iris, who had been living in an abandoned mill, it seemed like a palace. It had heat that worked, running water, a refrigerator stocked with food, a washing machine. "The spare room is through here," Margaret explained, leading them down a short hallway. "It's nothing special. I've used it as a home office, mostly." The room held a daybed, a desk, and bookshelves lined with history texts, evidence of Margaret's profession. "I'll put fresh sheets on the bed. There are towels in the bathroom cabinet. And," she hesitated, "I have some clothes that might fit you, Taylor. They're just extras, things I don't wear much." Taylor felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "Can I take a shower?" Iris asked. They'd been limited to sponge baths at public restrooms for months. "Of course," Margaret smiled. "Take as long as you like. There's plenty of hot water. While Iris showered, singing softly to herself in delight, Taylor stood awkwardly in the living room, acutely aware of the contrast between herself and the comfortable, if simple, surroundings. "Please, sit," Margaret urged. "Would you like tea or coffee?" "Coffee would be wonderful," Taylor admitted. As Margaret moved to the kitchen, Taylor noticed the photographs on the walls, mostly landscapes, but a few personal shots. One showed a much younger Margaret in a cap and gown. Another displayed her with an older woman who must have been her mother. "You never married?" Taylor asked. "No, never quite found the right person." She handed Taylor a mug. "My mother died 10 years ago. Cancer, like Adelaide. I've been on my own since then." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. It was Taylor who finally broached the subject that hung between them. "What happens now? With Pritchett, I mean. Eliza thinks we should proceed on multiple fronts simultaneously, file the civil suit, contact the other families, approach the media, and," she hesitated, "potentially confront Pritchett directly with a lawyer present to offer him a chance to come clean before it all becomes public. Is that safe?" Eliza believes it might be the most effective strategy. At 79, facing public disgrace and financial ruin, Pritchett might choose to confess rather than fight a protracted legal battle that would destroy his legacy regardless of outcome. The conversation paused as Iris emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping but her face glowing with happiness. "Mama, the shower has THRE settings, and the soap smells like lemons," Margaret laughed. "I'll find you something to wear," she offered, disappearing into her bedroom and returning with a soft t-shirt. "This will be big on you, but it should work as a nightgown for now." After Iris was dressed and settled in the spare room, exploring the bookshelves with delight, Taylor finally allowed herself the luxury of a shower. Standing under the hot spray, she wept silently. Tears of relief, exhaustion, and a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't fully name. The simple pleasure of being clean, truly clean, overwhelmed her. That evening, they shared a simple meal of pasta and salad. Margaret, it turned out, was not much of a cook. "I'm usually just feeding myself," she explained apologetically. "It's perfect," Taylor assured her. After dinner, as they sat in the living room, Eliza called with an update. The tape from the recorder had been partially restored. It wasn't as damning as they'd hoped, no outright confession, but it did capture Pritchett discussing the doctored inspection reports, saying, "What Thomas doesn't understand is that sometimes corners need cutting. Business isn't about coddling workers. It's about profit margins. It's not enough for a criminal case," Eliza explained, "but combined with the doctored reports and financial evidence, it strengthens our civil claim considerably." She also reported that she had successfully filed the initial paperwork for a wrongful death suit and had scheduled a meeting with a Tribune journalist for the following day. "What about the other families?" Margaret asked. "Frank's located 3 of them so far," Eliza replied. "He's approaching them carefully, explaining the situation. 2 have already expressed interest in joining the suit. Progress was being made. But for Taylor, another concern loomed larger. What would happen to Iris and herself after this was over? Margaret's generosity couldn't and shouldn't be indefinite. They needed a long-term solution, a way back to stability. The question kept her awake that night, even in the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed. Beside her, Iris slept deeply, her breathing even and peaceful in a way Taylor hadn't witnessed in months. Morning brought new developments. Frank arrived early, bringing donuts for breakfast and news. The Tribune journalist had agreed to meet them at 2 p.m. "This reporter, Jake Miller, has a reputation for integrity," Frank explained. "He's done investigative pieces on corporate malfeasance before. If he takes this story, Pritchett won't be able to bury it." "Will I need to talk to him?" Taylor asked. "I'm just the person who found the letter. I don't know anything about the mill or what happened back then." "You're more than that," Margaret corrected her. "You're the person who had the moral courage to pursue this when you could have ignored it. That matters. But no, you don't have to speak to the reporter if you're not comfortable." "What about Iris? I don't want her involved in this. She's been through enough," My neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, is a retired elementary school teacher, Margaret suggested. She watches children occasionally. I could ask if she'd stay with Iris this afternoon. The arrangement was made. Mrs. Delaney, a kind woman in her 70s, agreed to watch Iris during the meeting. Iris, delighted by the older woman's collection of children's books and promise of freshly baked cookies, didn't mind being left behind. The meeting with Jake Miller took place at a quiet cafe near the Tribune offices. The journalist was younger than Taylor had expected, early 30s, with alert eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened intently as Eliza and Margaret presented the evidence and explained the situation. "Let me get this straight," he said when they'd finished. Adelaide Brennan, before her death, left evidence that her brother Thomas was murdered in 1983 by Dale Pritchett, who then covered up safety violations that led to 5 more deaths. This evidence was hidden in a storage unit, which was purchased at auction by, he looked at Taylor, by you, Miss Hartley. And now, 40 years later, you're seeking justice for these deaths. That's the essence of it, Eliza confirmed. It's a compelling story. But Pritchett is powerful. He has friends at the paper, people who golf with the publisher. If I run this, I need it to be airtight. We have the inspection reports, Frank pointed, the financial records, the photographs, and the tape, though it's not as definitive as we'd hoped. I'd need to verify all of it, Jake insisted. And I'd like to speak with the families of the other workers who died. We're contacting them now, Eliza assured him. 3 have already agreed to be part of the civil suit. What about Pritchett himself? Jake asked. Will you approach him before publication? Eliza exchanged glances with Margaret. We're considering it, offering him a chance to respond, to tell his side before the story breaks. That's both ethically sound and legally protective. If he declines to comment or denies everything, it strengthens the story. By the end of the meeting, Jake had agreed to pursue the story, but with caution. He would need a week to verify the evidence, speak with the other families, and prepare a comprehensive piece. If everything checks out, he promised, this will be the front page. Pritchett won't be able to bury it. Back at Margaret's house, they found Iris and Mrs. Delaney baking a second batch of cookies. The kitchen was warm with the scent of cinnamon, and Iris's face was flushed with happiness. "Mama, we made snickerdoodles," she announced proudly. "Mrs. Delaney says I'm a natural baker." The elderly neighbor beamed. "She has a good touch with the dough. Don't overwork it." She gathered her things to leave. "Anytime you need me to watch her again, just let me know." We had a lovely afternoon. That evening, as they sat in Margaret's living room discussing next steps, Eliza called with unexpected news. Dale Pritchett had learned of their legal filing. "His lawyer contacted me," Eliza reported. "They're requesting a meeting tomorrow. Just legal representatives, they say, to explore the matter privately before any unnecessary public attention." "He's trying to buy us off," Frank growled. "Almost certainly," Eliza agreed. "But I think we should take the meeting. It gives us a chance to gauge how seriously they're taking the evidence and what they might be willing to concede." The next day brought a snowstorm, blanketing the city in white. Eliza went alone to meet Pritchett's legal team, leaving the others to wait anxiously at Margaret's house. She returned by mid-afternoon, brushing snow from her coat as she entered. Her expression was grim but determined. "They offered a settlement," she announced, $5 million, divided among all the families, contingent on complete confidentiality and destruction of all evidence. $5 million? Margaret repeated incredulously. For 6 lives? For 40 years of cover-up? "They're scared," Eliza observed. The lawyer, Harvard-educated, custom suit, the works, was trying to appear casual, but he was nervous. "They know how damaging this could be." "Did you tell them we're going to the press regardless?" Frank asked. "I explained that my clients are seeking justice, not enrichment, and that the evidence has already been secured in multiple locations." "What did they say to that?" Taylor asked. "They suggested that an elderly man's twilight years could be better spent in peace than courtrooms. And then they increased the offer to $8 million. Margaret shook her head firmly. "Not acceptable. My father's memory isn't for sale. Neither is the truth about what happened to those other workers." "That's essentially what I told them," Eliza confirmed. I did, however, suggest an alternative. Pritchett makes a full public admission, endows a memorial foundation for workplace safety in Thomas Brennan's name, and the families receive fair compensation determined by an independent mediator. And, Frank prompted, they said they would convey the terms to their client, but the lawyer's face suggested that Pritchett won't agree. The standoff continued for several days. Jake Miller's investigation proceeded, with Frank connecting him to the other families who had lost loved ones at the mill. Eliza prepared for both legal scenarios, a settlement on their terms, or a protracted court battle. Meanwhile, Taylor began looking for work. She couldn't continue to depend on Margaret's generosity indefinitely, with Margaret's address as a reference and a carefully crafted explanation of her employment gap. She applied for night custodial positions at several facilities. One evening, a week after they'd first met with Jake Miller, the reporter called with news. "The story is ready," he informed them. "My editor has approved it for Sunday's front page. But there's a development you should know about." They gathered around Margaret's phone on speaker to hear his update. I approached Pritchett directly yesterday, Jake explained. Professional courtesy, a chance to comment before publication. He refused to speak with me, but his lawyer called this morning. They're requesting a face-to-face meeting with all parties. All parties meaning? Eliza asked. You, Miss Chen, Margaret Brennan Hoskins, Frank Osei, and, specifically, Taylor Hartley. Why me? I'm just the person who found the evidence. That's precisely why, Jake theorized. You're the wild card in this, the unexpected factor that brought everything to light after 40 years. I think he wants to size you up. After discussion, they agreed to the meeting, with conditions. It would take place on neutral ground, a conference room at Eliza's law office, with Jake Miller present as an observer, and all evidence would remain securely elsewhere. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. Iris would stay with Miss Delaney again, safely away from the confrontation. Morning dawned cold and clear. Margaret was equally tense, pacing her small living room as they waited for Frank to pick them up. I haven't seen him since I was a child, she confessed. He came to Dad's funeral, stood right beside my mother and me at the cemetery, his hand on my shoulder, telling everyone what a tragedy it was, what a great man my father had been. I remember looking up at his face and knowing, just knowing, that he was lying, that he had something to do with Dad's death. But I was 13, and who listens to a grieving child's intuition? Taylor reached out, taking Margaret's trembling hand in hers. They'll listen now, she promised quietly. We'll make them listen. Frank arrived to drive them to Eliza's office. The journey was mostly silent, each lost in their own thoughts and apprehensions. At the office, Jake Miller was already waiting, notebook in hand but keeping a respectful distance, an observer, not a participant. Eliza greeted them in the lobby, her professional demeanor firmly in place. Pritchett is already here, she informed them, with his lawyer, Arnold Weintraub, and a younger man he introduced as his grandson, David Pritchett. A show of family solidarity, Frank muttered. Be prepared, Eliza warned. He's likely to try to humanize himself, to make emotional appeals. Don't let him control the narrative. She opened the door, and they entered. Dale Pritchett sat at the far end of the conference table, a tall, thin man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that betrayed no hint of frailty despite his 79 years. Beside him sat a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, Weintraub, presumably, and a younger man in his late 20s, wearing a similar suit but looking distinctly uncomfortable. Pritchett stood as they entered, his movements deliberate but steady. Miss Brennan Hoskins, he said, his voice stronger. You look very much like your father. Margaret stiffened but said nothing as they took their seats across the table. Pritchett's gaze moved to each of them in turn, finally settling on Taylor. And you must be Miss Hartley, he said, studying her with uncomfortable intensity. The woman who found Adelaide's materials. Taylor met his gaze directly. I am. A fortunate discovery for you. One might almost call it convenient. Eliza intervened. Mr. Pritchett, you requested this meeting. What exactly do you wish to discuss? I'm here to put an end to this unnecessary spectacle before it harms any more lives. Unnecessary spectacle? Margaret repeated. 6 men died. One of them was my father. Accidents happen in industrial settings, Pritchett replied. Tragic, yes, but not criminal. Adelaide was confused in her later years, imagining conspiracies, nursing old grudges. The evidence suggests otherwise, Frank countered. The doctored inspection reports, the embezzled maintenance funds, Thomas Brennan's detailed documentation of your scheme. Pritchett's lawyer leaned forward. Alleged evidence. 40-year-old papers that could have been altered by anyone. A recording so degraded it's barely intelligible. None of it would stand up in criminal court. Perhaps not, Eliza conceded. But in civil court, in the court of public opinion, with 6 families testifying about the loved ones they lost, I think you'll find the impact quite different. What exactly do you want? Pritchett finally asked. Margaret answered before Eliza could. The truth, a public acknowledgement of what you did, a memorial foundation in my father's name for workplace safety, and fair compensation to the families, determined not by you, but by an independent mediator. Impossible, Pritchett's lawyer interjected. My client maintains his innocence. Any settlement would be purely humanitarian, with no admission of wrongdoing. Then we have nothing to discuss, Margaret replied, starting to rise. Wait, it was the grandson who spoke, earning a sharp look from both Pritchett and the lawyer. He seemed to struggle internally before continuing. Grandfather, maybe we should consider their terms. David, Pritchett warned, this isn't your concern. It is, the young man insisted. It's my future, too. Pritchett Consulting bears our name, my name. Whatever comes out in this lawsuit, in the press. It affects me, too. He turned to Margaret, his expression earnest. I never knew about any of this. I was born after the mill closed. But if what you're saying is true, he glanced at his grandfather, then we owe you more than money. We owe you the truth. Dale Pritchett's face hardened, but something in his grandson's words seemed to reach him. He stared at the polished surface of the conference table for a long moment, then raised his eyes to meet Margaret's. What would you have me say? He asked. That I cut corners? That I diverted funds? Fine. I did those things. Business was struggling. The textile industry was dying. We were facing competition from overseas that we couldn't match. And my father found out, Margaret prompted. Thomas was an idealist. He didn't understand the realities of business. He threatened to expose everything, to shut us down rather than operate with what he called blood money. Do you know how many jobs would have been lost? Hundreds. So you had him killed, Frank stated. No, Pritchett's denial was vehement. I never ordered anyone's death. I simply ensured that the machine he was inspecting that day wasn't properly secured. I thought it would scare him, maybe injure him enough to make him reconsider. I never intended. And the other 5 workers? Taylor asked. Were they accidents too, or more scares that went wrong? Jesus, grandfather, David whispered, his face ashen. How could you? The older man's shoulders slumped. It was a different time, he said. Sacrifices had to be made for progress, for profit. Human sacrifices, Margaret said. My father, those other men, their families. Finally, Eliza spoke. Mr. Pritchett, I believe we have the basis for an agreement here. A full public statement acknowledging your role in the safety violations that led to these deaths. The establishment of a memorial foundation and compensation for the families, as previously discussed. Pritchett looked to his lawyer, who gave a resigned nod. The alternative is worse, Weintraub murmured. A public trial, media coverage, potential criminal investigations reopened. Fine, Pritchett conceded. Draft the agreement. I'll sign it. As they prepared to leave, Taylor found herself face-to-face with Pritchett in the hallway outside the conference room. For a moment, they regarded each other, the powerful man brought low by truth, and the homeless woman who had helped reveal it. You could have sold that toolbox and its contents to the highest bidder, Pritchett observed quietly. A woman in your position, it would have been the logical choice. Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Pritchett, she replied simply. Dignity, truth, justice. You spent a lifetime thinking everything and everyone had a price. I'm sorry that you never learned otherwise. She turned away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, a man confronting the true cost of the fortune he'd built. The agreement was finalized within days. Dale Pritchett signed a detailed confession acknowledging his responsibility for the safety violations that led to Thomas Brennan's death and the deaths of 5 other workers. He agreed to endow the Thomas Brennan Memorial Foundation for Workplace Safety with $10 million, and he consented to a compensation fund of $15 million to be divided among the families of the victims, including Margaret. The Tribune ran the story on Sunday's front page, just as planned. Jake Miller's meticulous reporting laid out the 40-year cover-up, the discovery of Adelaide's hidden evidence, and Pritchett's eventual confession. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Former Brennan Mill employees came forward with their own stories of unsafe conditions and close calls. Other journalists began investigating similar cases at factories owned by Pritchett's business associates. The city council launched a review of all buildings and streets named after Pritchett, with many calling for their renaming. For Taylor and Iris, the media attention was uncomfortable but brief. Jake Miller had respected their privacy, mentioning Taylor only as the woman who discovered Adelaide Brennan's hidden evidence, without details about their circumstances. 3 weeks after their discovery in Storage Unit 273, Taylor received a job offer, night custodian at Mercy Hospital, the same hospital where she had once worked as an orderly. The hiring manager didn't recognize her, and Taylor didn't remind him. It was enough to have steady employment again, with health insurance that would cover Iris's asthma medication. With her first paycheck, supplemented by a small advance from Margaret, Taylor secured a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. It wasn't glamorous, peeling paint, cracked linoleum, a temperamental refrigerator, but it had heat that worked, running water, and a door that locked. After 18 months of homelessness, it felt like a palace. Margaret helped them furnish the basics: a couch from Goodwill, a folding table with 2 chairs, beds for each of them. Taylor insisted on paying her back eventually, and Margaret didn't argue, understanding her need for independence. From the settlement, Margaret received $2.5 million as Thomas Brennan's heir. She immediately donated $1 million to various homelessness relief organizations, saying simply, "I've seen firsthand how easily it can happen to anyone." With another portion, she established a small scholarship fund for Iris's future education. "Thomas would have wanted this," she told Taylor when she tried to object. "My father believed in education more than anything. Let him help one more child, even if he never got to see me grow up." The mill property, now legally Margaret's, became the center of a community revitalization project. Rather than selling to developers, she worked with the local historical society to preserve part of it as a memorial museum documenting the workers' lives and deaths. The rest would be converted into affordable housing, a fitting tribute to Thomas Brennan's concern for working families. Dale Pritchett never faced criminal charges. As Eliza had predicted, the statute of limitations had expired on most of his crimes, and proving murder 40 years later, even with his confession, wasn't legally feasible. But his reputation was destroyed. His company lost clients. His charitable foundation board asked him to resign. His country club membership was quietly revoked. His grandson David assumed control of the family business, renaming it and instituting rigorous ethics and safety policies. 6 months after finding the storage unit, Taylor's life had found a new stability. It wasn't affluence. She still worked nights, still budgeted carefully, still shopped sales and saved pennies. But Iris was enrolled in public school, making friends, thriving. Her asthma was under control with regular medication. They had enough to eat, warm clothes, and a roof that didn't leak. Margaret became a regular visitor, often bringing books for Iris or joining them for simple meals. The unlikely friendship forged in crisis had deepened into something like family. The history teacher and the hospital custodian, connected by fate and shared purpose. On a Tuesday evening in late summer, Taylor returned home from work exhausted after a particularly grueling shift. The apartment was still mostly empty. They were adding furnishings slowly, as they could afford them, but it was clean and orderly. Iris was doing homework on the floor, the old stuffed rabbit still her constant companion. She looked up as her mother entered. Mama, I got a 95 on my math test. Taylor collapsed beside her daughter, pulling her close. Despite her exhaustion, pride swelled in her chest. I'm so proud of you, baby. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Taylor's eyes drifting closed with fatigue. Then Iris asked, "Do you think Adelaide is proud of us?" "I think Adelaide is finally at peace," she answered slowly. "And I think Thomas knows his little girl got the truth. And us? Are we at peace?" Taylor looked around their tiny apartment, the peeling paint, the cracked linoleum, but also the homework spread on the floor, the photographs they'd begun to collect on the walls, the groceries in the refrigerator. A home. Not grand, not perfect, but theirs. "Yeah," she said softly. "Yeah, I think we are." Through the window, the city lights flickered on as dusk fell. Somewhere across town, the old Brennan Mill stood, no longer abandoned, its broken windows replaced, its future reimagined as both memorial and new beginning.